professional advancement here at Gratz College. It is wonderful to see we're all here tonight. Thank you for being here. I am just simply here to welcome and begin this evening and to introduce the president of Gratz College, Dr. Paul Finkelman. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you. I thank all of you for coming. Tonight is a very special occasion. We are introducing the first lecture in the Rabbi Admiral Aaron Landis lectures on Jews in the military. This lecture is sponsored by the Landis family, who are sitting in the front row, and I would love everybody to give a wonderful round of applause for the Landis family. In a little while, I will ask Josh to come up and say a few words. For anyone who knows anything about this neighborhood, the name Landis is a very large and powerful name. I moved to Philadelphia after Rabbi Landis had passed on, and so I never got to meet him. But what I have read about him is that he was a remarkable man, serving as a rabbi for a very long time in what I think almost all Americans understand is the most iconic Jewish synagogue in the United States. It is the most famous physical building for Jewish worship, Beth Shalom. But more than that, of course, it has always been a very powerful force in the city of Philadelphia and in the United States. Rabbi Landis was a scholar, he was a rabbi, he was beloved. Reading his obituary, I learned that he was known as the kissing rabbi, which explains a lot about the way in which, when I first met Josh Landis, he hugged me and shook my hand and shook my hand again and hugged me again, because that's the kind of family he came from. I later found out tonight that when Rabbi Landis was retired from the Navy as an admiral, there were, I think they said 15 other admirals present, and he kissed every one of them. And that's the kind of man he was. He was also, of course, as I think many people know, the second rabbi to become the head of the Chaplain Corps in the Navy. The first rabbi was his neighbor from across the street, Rabbi Bertram Korn, Admiral Korn at KI. And so, in a sense, this is an incredibly unique neighborhood because we have produced two rabbi admirals and two heads of the Navy Chaplain Corps. And we now have, and I will introduce him in a few minutes, another admiral in the neighborhood, Mike Middleman, who is the president of Salus University. So this is really, I think, the center of the Jewish admiralties in the United States, and maybe in the world. I suspect, actually, that Old York Road probably has more Jewish admirals than any street, even in Israel. And this is a remarkable thing. As I said, I never got to know Rabbi Landis or Admiral Landis or Rabbi Admiral Landis, and so I can only speak about him by reading what people said about him. But I don't think that's really the best way to do it. So what I'm going to do for the moment, and then I'm going to come back to introduce Dr. Middleman, is to ask Josh to come up and say a few words about his father. Josh, of course, grew up in the neighborhood. He received his BA from Rutgers University. This being, of course, an academic institution, we have to give people their pedigree. And he later attended the University of Pennsylvania. No, he didn't attend the University of Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, to his credit, he did not attend. But nevertheless, he is an important figure in the American Jewish community, and he is an enormously generous philanthropist for Jewish causes and a triple patriot. He is a patriot for the United States. He's a patriot for the American Jewish community, and he's a patriot for Israel. And so I'm honored to have Josh Landis here tonight to say a few words about his dad.
Dr. Paul, you have set a beautiful tone for this evening. For a man who never met my father, you captured my father in just those few stories. And appropriate to this time of the year, the 19th of Nisan was my father's 5th yahrzeit. That was last week. And I have the honor to stand here in front of my beautiful mother, Sora, who raised me, and my 3 beautiful sisters who share this evening, Rena, Rebecca, and Tamar, and my wife, Bryna, who is here, my cousin, Donna, who is here, and my dear friend, Yuri, who knew my father and helped eulogize my father. Yuri was very proud, he became a captain in the U.S. Navy, etc. I am privileged to call that man, Admiral Shelanski, my friend. He is also a role model to me, and my whole family really got to know the Admiral in a handful of events in life, but one that comes to mind in May of 2012. Among the few things in the Admiral's CV is that as a lowly 1-star admiral, he was invited to lead Fleet Week in New York. And I had the zechut, the honor of hosting him for Shabbat at my home. That was only after the Friday morning when he met with Mayor Bloomberg, when he was invited to the New York Stock Exchange to ring the bell. He then spent a beautiful Shabbat dinner with us. He came to my shul and wowed 500 of my congregants. My rabbi said to me, "Josh, I don't get a standing ovation when I speak." And it was well worthy of the ovation, as you will all see. My father was a talented man. Admiral Middleman, who we are honored to have here, is a talented man. Admiral Shelanski is a talented man. These men are credits to the Jewish nation, to America, and they got ahead through competence. Competence. I would like to say that in spending time with the Admiral, meeting people who served under him, he doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't raise his voice. And I most recently heard him speak in New York, where among him, he might tell us, but his last position, all the things you read about, anyone who got an award, he was in charge of. When you heard of ships colliding in the Pacific, the Admiral, that was, he had a lot to do with finding out to the bottom of it. But in raising my own children, I changed certain ways that I speak to my own son. I don't want my son to be afraid of me because I want him to open up and talk to me. And the Admiral said a very profound thing in a question and answer session where he said, I'm putting words in his mouth, but I think this is accurate. You as a commanding officer, your people have to be able to approach you. You will see his ability. The word no did not exist in his vocabulary. He got things done. It's staggering. The competence of these people, it's amazing. So competence and kindness, a common denominator with my own father of blessed memory. Tomorrow is Yom HaShoah. The Admiral will tell us about some of his experiences related to Sifrei Torah on ships that went through the Holocaust. He is always comfortable in his Jewish skin, a great poster boy for our people. In closing, on Friday, August 3rd, 2018, I was privileged to be invited to the Admiral's retirement ceremony. There was weather. I was in upstate New York and I was supposed to fly down for his retirement. The weather was such that my plane was canceled. The Admiral in his graciousness said, "Josh, it's going to be lousy weather. I totally understand." One of my moles at his retirement who's a world-famous think tank head, gave me real time, and I'm just going to read. This is a photograph of the Admiral, which clearly you cannot all see. But at the highest levels of American might, this is what they say about the Admiral. CNO, Chief of Naval Operations Richardson, quotes Talmud on judges as partners to Hashem in describing the Vice Admiral. Richardson ends by asking us all to say the Shachianu. I think it appropriate in what we're about to hear and in the dedication of this first Rabbi Admiral Aaron Landis lecture that I say Shachianu, you are welcome to join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shachianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu l'zman hazeh.
Thank you, Josh. So tonight, the first thing I would like to do is welcome a number of people besides the Landis family and Admiral Dr. Middleman, who's also, of course, president of Salus University, so he's President Admiral Doctor. I'm not sure which comes first in which order. I'd like to welcome Dave Corrigan, who is a veteran of the Marine Corps and the field representative for Congresswoman Madeline Dean. And I would like to welcome Bill Kammer, who is the head of the Chapel of the Four Chaplains, the four chaplains in World War II who went down with their ship, giving their spaces on boats to other sailors instead. I would like to welcome Scott Schley, who is a veteran, 20-year retired veteran of the Navy, and has not only chauffeured Admiral Shelanski, but also serves as the husband of the chair of the Board of Governors at Gratz College. And finally, I would like to ask all of you who are veterans to just stand up or wave if you don't feel like standing up, so that we can thank you for your service. Thank you for Thank you all very much. I suspect there are other people who I should have recognized, but my staff didn't tell me who they are, so I can't. Pardon? I want to say something about the nature of these lectures, because the Jewish military experience, especially in the United States, is very long and goes back a very long way. In the early colonial period, all men, adult men, were expected to serve, among other things, in what was called the night watch, which was a cross between the militia and a police force. And if you didn't serve the night watch, particularly if you were, say, a Quaker or a Mennonite and wouldn't carry weapons, then you would pay a fine, which was essentially a way of getting out and paying the night watch. And in the late 1690s, the authorities in New York went to Asher Levy, who was the leader of the very, very tiny Jewish community in New York, and they asked Asher Levy to pay his fine for not serving the night watch. And he said, why should I pay the fine? Of course I'll serve the night watch. And they said, but the Jews don't serve the night watch. And he said, well, two things. One is I don't have any money for a fine. And secondly, this Jew serves the night watch. And so he served the night watch. And the next year he showed up to vote. And they told him, well, Jews can't vote. And he said, but I serve the night watch. So of course I can vote. And they let him vote. And so from that moment on, Jewish men in America served like their Christian neighbors. And that was different from most of Western Europe. When the American Revolution began, a number of Jews served as officers, including a Lieutenant Colonel David Franks, who served on Washington's personal staff. He was undoubtedly the highest-ranking Jew in a Western army. I say a Western army because, oddly enough, there were Jewish officers in Poland and in Russia, and even in the Ottoman army at this time, but not in the Western world, not in England, not in France, certainly not in Spain, since there were no Jews in Spain at the time. But a number of other Jews served as officers. One of the earliest casualties in the war was Francis Salvador, a Jew who had been elected to one of the early Revolutionary War Congresses in South Carolina, and then later as a casualty in the war himself. So the Jewish military experience is very strong. There were 4 Jews who served as generals in the United States Army during the Civil War, and there was a colonel who organized a regiment in Philadelphia that was a Jewish regiment, and it was one of the first regiments in the United States to insist on having a Jewish chaplain. At the time, the law said that every regiment should have a Protestant chaplain. So there was a great controversy when you suddenly had regiments of Jews saying, no, we want a Jewish chaplain. That changed, and that happened. So the Jewish military experience is one in this country that goes a long way. And it is in this context that we have this lecture this year. We will have another one next year where we talk about the Jewish experience in the military. I've asked Dr. Middleman to introduce Admiral Shelanski. Dr. Middleman, as I said, is the president of Salus University. He is a veteran of the Navy, a 2-star admiral. He is an optometrist and has a doctor. He also has an astounding career. He has a long list of publications, which one would expect for a college president. He also has a patent for night vision goggle focusing aid, patent number 5546241, which I think is, pretty cool. He has been a flight surgeon. He has served in a variety of positions within the Navy. He received the Navy Achievement Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal twice, the Meritorious Service Medal 3 times, the Legion of Merit 5 times, the Defense Superior Service Medal twice. If he were a baseball player, he'd be an all-star. And so I'd like to invite all-star Middleman to come up and introduce him.
First time I've got an introduction to give an introduction. So, and I got to tell you, after listening to Josh, I can't top that. You hit the nail on the head, because you talked about all the important stuff. My task is to talk a little bit about Admiral Shelanski's naval career. We never met, but we're kindred spirits because of where we served and the government we took care of and the wonderful Navy that we were both a part of. We share one duty station, and the command is no longer. We're at the Joint Forces Command together in Norfolk. I don't know if you have his bio in front of you, but it's unbelievably remarkable. He graduated from the University of Colorado. He's not even a Naval Academy graduate. Look where he went. So he didn't go to trade school. So he went to a real college, as we joke. But he's got a degree in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology. Most of our students at Salus have degrees like that. But he didn't go on to medicine. He went on to greater things. He wasn't satisfied with just learning about molecular and cellular biology. He went on to the Naval Postgraduate School. He earned a master's degree in electrical and space systems engineering. Something a little simple, right? He's also a graduate of the Armed Forces Staff College, the Naval Nuclear Power School and Prototype, Naval Reactors Commanding Officer, and Naval Engineer course. That's the course that they send people who are going to command our nuclear carriers, which he did. And of course, the Naval War College, clearly an underachiever. He was also a naval flight officer. So his career spanned service on the USS Independence, where he served as an assistant navigator, in addition to flying in the E-2C Hawkeye. He earned 2 consecutive C&O Battalier Awards, and that's for excellence in readiness. And ultimately selected as the 1985, I'm dating a little bit, I guess, Hawkeye of the Year, which is a big deal. There are a lot of naval flight officers, a lot of pilots, and Vice Admiral Shelanski was the #1. His command tours, most of us get 1, maybe 2, included the 6th Fleet command ship, the LaSalle, remember LaSalle, the aircraft carrier Harry S. Truman, which included a 7-month deployment to the Arabian Gulf in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He commanded the Carrier Strike Group 10, which consisted of the Truman, Carrier Air Wing, 15 ships, and that's probably about 8,000, 9,000 sailors. No small responsibility. And then ashore, Vice Admiral Shelanski served on the Joint Staff, that's in the Pentagon, working for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, U.S. Forces Central Command in Bahrain, U.S. Joint Forces Command in Norfolk, and also there's a NATO component of that as well. And then on the NAV staff, that's for the Chief of Naval Operations, as the Director of the Navy's Environmental Readiness Division, which is an extremely important job. And then on May 15th, I guess he had the hallmark of his career, I guess you're the best judge of that, but he was appointed as the 40th Naval Inspector General, where he basically oversaw pretty much all the operations, everything that goes right, everything that goes wrong in the Navy. It's a huge responsibility until his retirement on 1 August. So it is my distinct pleasure and honor to bring Admiral Shelanski.
All right, well, good evening. Well, now I'm humbled. But probably not as humble as I was in 2012 when I was getting ready to turn over probably the largest command of my career as the Strike Group 10 commander, where I had command of both the Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier, the 60 tactical jets in the air wing, 15 destroyers, 2 cruisers, about 8,000 men, about $8 billion of responsibility and equipment and the lives and the mission accomplishment of that great time. And you can see in this picture a hangar bay with thousands of sailors. You know, we're all in our whites. It's a very formal affair. And as I was walking up to the dais to give my speech, I passed my mother in the front row, and she nudged the Admiral and she says, "That's my boy Herm, he's magnificent." You know, his sister-in-law is a very famous doctor in Philadelphia. So I'm also humbled to be here at Gratz College. It is the first opportunity I've been here. You know, last night I spent time with my father from Philadelphia. My dad's from Philly. And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to Gratz to give a speech." And he says, "Oh, Gratz on North Broad and Dauphine?" And I said, "I don't think so. This one's at Melrose Place, or Melrose Park." And he goes, "I don't know if that's the same one." So I Googled it, and of course it is. And he goes, "Yeah, well, I'm a Gratz graduate." And I said, "You gotta be kidding." So he went to Hebrew school. He grew up in 8th and Porter, took the trolley up with a nickel, and would come to Hebrew school when it was the original Gratz back then. So, also, I think that, you know, Rebecca Gratz and the stuff that she did to formulate and get this school up and running is pretty. She was a remarkable woman. And part of the things, the charities that she did was in the late 1800s was to help Jews that were coming over from Europe, to help them assimilate and not be assimilated by other religions, which they were a lot were being preyed upon. So remarkably, my grandparents came from Lithuania around that time period and were recipients of some of that same help back when they first started here in Philadelphia. And tonight I'm going to discuss my hero, Uriah P. Levy, who, like Rebecca Gratz, was also a Philadelphian. In fact, they were born 1 year apart. And they were both born at an exciting time of our history, the Revolution and the War of 1812. Now, I don't know, I haven't seen anything in the writing whether they knew each other, but you know, they both went to Mikveh Israel, so you got to think that they probably at least talked to each other sometime during the life. And they were both great philanthropists and interested in Jewish education. So there's a strong link there between my hero and Rebecca Gratz. And I specifically like a quote from Diane Ashton about Rebecca, where she says, a Jewish woman could be both fully Jewish and fully American. And as we say in the military, there's your bluff. BLUF, bottom line up front. Or translated, you know, that's the basis of what I'm going to talk about. But before I do so, I want to add my thoughts to this man, in blessed memory, Admiral Aaron Landis. And I won't give you his history, but I will give you, I think, what impression and what he did for me in the Navy. So, chief chaplains for the reserves mentored many a rabbi, many a non-Jewish chaplain. And that was the generation of the chaplains that served me and my family to help us enjoy the Jewish life, whether it was here in the United States, whether we were deployed on ships, or whether we were overseas. He was also the first at the Naval Academy. When he spent time there, they asked him, they said, hey, Landis, how come there's not more Jewish students running around here at the academy? He goes, well, what do you think? You make a march out of town, out of the academy every Saturday to go to services. You have nothing here for them. So he started his own little chapel, interfaith chapel, to keep them on the Naval Academy, and that grew to one of the most impressive ideas, and that was to build a chapel, this chapel, the Levy Chapel on Annapolis, a Jewish chapel right there for Jews. An amazing history. So to my friend Josh, his wife Sora, thank you for this series to honor a great man, a great admiral, and a great Jew. So, for tonight, I want to talk and give you a little bit of history about myself and my Navy career and my hero. But first I want to start with the United States Navy. Okay. There we go. Right there. Right? So the Navy, protecting the sea lines of communication, American interest around the world. We do this through sea power. And today the United States Navy dominates the oceans of the world. There's really none like us. Our mission is to be ready to fight at sea, deter aggression, and peacefully resolve any conflicts, but when necessary, go to war and to win. And beyond that shoreline that we all get to see every day, 70% of the world is covered by the oceans. 80% of the world's population lives within those 40 miles on the coast, and 90% of all the world's goods travel in the ocean. And the United States Navy, we're on patrol 100% of the time. There are over 50,000 sailors today, 48 ships deployed. There are other 90 that are underway in training. And in the Navy, 330,000 sailors and over 100,000 in the reserves. We have over 289 deployable ships and thousands of aircraft. And our main mission is to keep these sea lines of trade open, the flow of goods. 25% of all U.S. jobs are directly related to those goods moving on the ocean. 25% of U.S. manufacturing jobs depend on exports. And 20% of all agricultural products by volume are sold into overseas markets. Now, there are other things that we protect that aren't as well known. It's very touchy. I'll get it. There we go. Underwater cables. This is where 90% of all global communications take place. And then, of course, with a forward deployed force, we're always ready to respond when disaster strikes, such as the disaster in Japan at the Fukushima nuclear plant, the Ebola crisis in Africa, or just last year, the hurricanes in the Caribbean. And we do all these things on the surface of the water, below the water, in the air, our special forces, the Navy SEALs, and with our partners, the United States Marine Corps. But today, freedom of the seas and our allies are once again being threatened by really growing competitors. In the East China Sea, the Chinese are working to dominate and control the movement of trade on the water. And in Europe, Russia is moving to control the Baltic, threaten our NATO partners, and other nations such as the Ukraine. They're both building their navies. China has the largest shipyard in the world, and today is building 5 aircraft carriers. Russia, though behind in the surface navy, has some of the most technologically advanced submarines in the world that they want to sneak up to our coast loaded with nuclear weapons. So to answer this threat, the Navy's growing. And though I'm confident that we have the power to prevail, we need to grow and to continue our dominance on the sea. And so I'm going to talk to you today about one particular aspect of the Navy, my love of the Navy, and that's one as being an aviator and a carrier commander on the best aircraft carrier in the world, the USS Harry S. Truman. So, to imagine this, first you have to picture in your mind this building, the Empire State Building. That's the size of the aircraft carrier. Over 1,096 feet long, 251 feet wide. It has 4.5 acres on the flight deck. It's the length of 3 football fields. It displaces over 100,000 tons of water, over 60,000 tons of steel, and 1 million pounds of aluminum were used in its construction. There are over 4,000 rooms on board. It has these huge elevators that can lift 2 40,000-pound aircraft from the hangar bay up to the flight deck to get ready for launch. It has 21-foot diameter propellers, each weighing 66,700 pounds. It's steered by these 2 immense rudders, 29 by 22 feet, each of them weighing 50 tons. And it has its own electrical plant, run by 2 nuclear power plants, over 190 kilowatts of energy. Those nuclear power plants don't need to be refueled except once every 25 years. They are able to create superheated steam to run the turbine generators, which turn those huge propellers to take this ship at amazing speeds at over 30 knots, which is equivalent to over 35 kilometers an hour or 30 miles an hour. We love to do this type of turn. I used to call it the bat turn. We would slow down to 8 knots, shift the rudders to full rudder, and then go all ahead flank, which is you turn and open the throttles up. And it pushes so much water around, it pushes the back of the ship around so you can reposition and run downwind to get ready for the next flight. And underneath this flight deck is a whole city. Just like Philadelphia, it has a daily newspaper, radio, television station, fire department, library, hospital, general store, restaurants, police, fire departments, 2 barbershops, and a post office with its own zip code. And it has on it its own flight deck. So this is the main function of the aircraft carrier, to launch and recover aircraft to do our nation's bidding. You'll see these tactical airplanes, over 60 tactical jets. We have both electronic attack, airborne early warning surveillance, and strike and attack airplanes and helicopters. So when I used to sit on the bridge and look down on the flight deck, you see this amazing steam coming off the steam catapults. It's It's almost an eerie netherworld, and sailors are dressed in these bright colors: blue, red, brown, white, green flight deck jersey, where they all move on the flight deck. It's a huge coordinated ballet of purposeful motion. Sailors will unchain the aircraft, refuel it, put on weapons, and they do this with big smiles on their faces. Here on the flight deck, pilots are getting ready to man up their airplanes for the launch of the day. But before they do so, they go to the CAT, which is a catapult, and it's the equivalent of a dual-barreled shotgun with thousands of pounds of superheated steam. And you attach an airplane to this dual-powered shotgun, and then when ready, you push a button and it releases the steam and puts that airplane airborne. And as they go to the CAT, these young enlisted sailors get underneath the airplane, make sure that everything's attached, make sure that the airplane is perfectly ready for the flight of the day. They scan forward on the flight deck and aft to make sure everything's clear, and then when they push the button, they feel the immense and the surprising tug, and it's a neck-snapping acceleration from 0 to 160 miles an hour in just 2 seconds. I'll tell you, it's a ride that's more fun than Six Flags, Busch Gardens, or Disney World. And so our aircraft carriers and naval aviation, they operate off our enemy's coast. We don't need bases or allied territory since we carry our airfield with us. We have the ability to reach into deep places, like in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, to deliver precise weapons on our enemies if needed, or deliver humanitarian aid. And when the pilots are done the mission, can't see it here, they recover the airplane. As they come in for their landing, they pull 3 to 4 or 5 times on their harnesses to make sure that they're locked. They do a quick check on the rudders, a touch to the throttles. Their hook is down, trying to catch one of 3 wire cables stretched across the deck. They travel from 150 miles an hour to a complete stop in less than 400 feet on the angle deck. And if they miss, they go full power takeoff and go around again. So who are these men and women on the flight deck? Well, they represent the total population of our Navy, and they work like you would not believe. This area is rated by Lloyd's of London, the famous insurance company, as the most dangerous place to work in the world. Because they're invisible turning propellers, jet blast, rolling and pitching deck, rain, 120-degree heat of the Arabian Gulf, freezing cold of the North Atlantic, and darkness at night is when these sailors operate. And they come from all over the 50 states and U.S. territories. Typically, they're young, average age of 22. They're looking for careers or on-the-job training or serving to get a college education. But all of them are patriotic Americans. And of course, they are Caucasian, African American, Asian American, Latino, Hispanic, Catholic, Protestant, and yes, Jewish. But they're not defined or referred to by these categories. Navy's training has made them seamen or bosun mate, gunner, quartermaster, shipmates, and they're judged purely by their ability and what they contribute to the team. But of course, life in the Navy has not always been so idealistic, and when you read naval history, you know that it has grown into something more today that we like. Though we still have a long way to go, but we like to think back at history at this time period with this gentleman. Uriah P. Levy, my favorite naval hero. And we have a real kinship because first, we were both born in Philadelphia, we both love America, and we both have a connection of our proud Jewish heritage. And of course, our love of the sea. His family left Spain in 1492 to escape the Inquisition, first settled in England, and then eventually made their way to America. So he was born in 1782. Just 6 years after the Declaration of Independence, and just after the surrender of Yorktown, same year. And it was also 1 year after the Articles of Confederation were ratified by the Second Continental Congress in 1781. So he was born and raised in this American experiment of government. And it was a very precipitous point on whether this country could stay together after winning the revolution. And at age 5, Uriah was probably witness to a host of famous founding fathers entering the city. This painting kind of captures the excitement and wonders of the Philadelphians as the famous George Washington rides in to take and head the Philadelphia Convention, which convened at the Pennsylvania State House on May 14th through September 17th, where they were going to write a constitution to correct the weaknesses of the articles that had been apparent before the American Revolution had successfully concluded. But the states had to ratify this new document, and there were a lot of objections because the states wanted a Bill of Rights. Finally, on March 4th, 1799, the new frame of government came into force when 11 of the 13 states voted on it, with North Carolina and Rhode Island waiting for the amendments from Congress before ratifying. From this arose the United States Bill of Rights, which comprised the first 10 amendments of the Constitution with specific guarantees of personal freedoms and rights, which are particularly important to all Jews, especially at that time. And of course, the freedom of religion. And this is probably one of the most amazing pieces of the American experiment, because it wasn't always a guarantee. For instance, the state debate in Virginia that happened a year earlier in the Virginia House of Delegates, Thomas Jefferson put forth a bill for establishing religious freedom. That house was still dominated by Anglicans. Dissenters, they dissented the bill's request for greater religious freedom and the separation of church and state. In fact, these members of the Virginia Assembly tried to delete the entire Jeffersonian preamble, which was an endorsement of Enlightenment principles and religious freedom. And they specifically wanted to modify Jefferson's generic reference, quote, the holy author of our religion, so that it specified Jesus Christ. But finally, January 16, 1786, because James Madison, the Virginia Assembly passed the bill, and this bill, this important bill from Virginia, effectively severs the connection between church and state, but also serves as a bellwether of all articles of religious freedom, specifically the Bill of Rights. As Jefferson said, it was clear to him that Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and the Mohammedan, the Hindu and infidel of every denomination needs religious freedom. And this became, as I said, a bellwether, but not just in the United States, but in nations all over the world. So when James Madison started to write the Bill of Rights in the first Congress under the new Constitution, with Jefferson serving as its advocate, this became law. And this was the time in the War of Words where outcomes positively influenced this young Uriah Levy. And of course, years later, myself. So Uriah, born into this patriotic fervor at the time, but also the uncertainty of where it would go. He was certainly influenced by his parents and relatives, how it lived through that long American Revolution. You know, when the British came and occupied in Philadelphia. They hoped for the success that the experiment would have, and they were influenced by some of the greatest minds, especially Thomas Jefferson. So you got to imagine how people at that time, our forefathers in Philadelphia, thought. And then, first the revolution, winning the revolution, which was against all odds that a small rebel army could defeat the British Empire. And then the Constitution, and then a Bill of Rights. Today, I think we've lost the sense of great relief, the surprise and the amazement that we had, because this was the first country since our diaspora that we had a place that we could securely live and worship God in the tradition of our ancestors without fear. And Uriah was also influenced by lots of other events happening on the Philadelphia waterfront. It was one of the busiest ports of America. Ships of all sizes, large sails billowing in the wind, all the ancient smells from far-off lands of silks, teas, and exotic spices. Lots of exotic-looking sailors and merchants. And in the market center, he must have been amazed at the amount of things that came from around the world. So much to the point that at age 12 he ran away and became a cabin boy on one of these merchant ships. Now the promise that was made, he finally got permission from his father to do this so that he could come back and have his bar mitzvah at 13. So after 6 years, his progress was really remarkable, and he progressed to that of a rated sailing master. Now this meant, for a kid that did not have formal education, it meant rigorous training in mathematics to learn navigation. It meant to memorize the hundreds of lines and 50-odd sails of a typical sailing vessel. The master's duty was navigation, taking the ship's position. He was responsible for fitting the ship, making sure they had all the supplies, stowing the hold, and ensuring it was not too weighted to sail effectively. He was in charge of raising and lowering the anchor, docking and undocking the ship, and then any problems with any of those, sails, masts, ropes, or pulleys, he had to get the crew to fix. Basically, any problem on the ship was brought to the master, who would then fix it and then tell the captain it was fixed. So many a man of typical intellect found this a daunting task. In fact, in the navies of the world, the British Navy and the United States Navy included, many commissioned officers found this very difficult to do. And so navies then had masters, sailing masters, come on board fighting ships to handle the technical details of the ship. Now Uriah became so successful at this, in 6 years after that, by the age of 19, he was his own partner in his own ship that he named the George Washington out of a great deal of patriotism. But then 1812 happened. Now similar to the surge after 9/11, 1812 was another huge patriotic time in our nation. And so he left the ship and at age 20 answered his country's call and went to sea to fight for his country. Now, scholars will debate the actual causes of the War of 1812 because a lot of the wartime propaganda sort of misguides the lay leader. But that being said, most historians don't believe there was any single cause, but a variety of things. Some official, some not official. Some were due to the British orders in council, which was a regulation from the British that would not allow the Americans to do any trade with the French, who they were fighting at the time. And the French had a similar law that said the Americans can't do any trading with the British, who they were fighting at the time. In fact, we went to war with France for a very short period over this time. And then, 1812, we decided we'd fight the British because of this law and interfering with our merchandise, but also because of this thing called impressment. And this was the act of forcing men into military sea service. And by 1812, the British Navy had captured over 9,000 American sailors and pressed them into their navy, made them work in their navy. This caused a large public outrage in America. Now, certainly both these issues must have been in the mind of Uriah because he was a merchant, and his ability to conduct commerce was restricted. And also, the fear for himself personally and for his crew led him to be patriotic and then go to war. Now, the War of 1812 was where our Navy first established itself as a national naval fighting force that had to be reckoned with. We built only 6 frigates. They were the most technologically advanced ships of the time. We wouldn't be able to fight all the British ships, but one-on-one, we could decisively beat them, and we did. So Uriah went to join in the Argus, who sailed around England, capturing and destroying British commerce ships until he was captured by the British, and he and the crew were imprisoned in England until after the war. Now, he could have gone back to being a merchant. He could have gone back to making money, and he had his interest in his ship, but he decided to make a career in the United States Navy. So, when he came in and decided to stay, he came with his Judaic faith and his religious beliefs. He believed he could be both an American and a Jew. But unfortunately, as he tried to make his career, he had to fight immense prejudice. His first assignment on the Franklin was where he first encountered anti-Semitism. He was insulted by a drunken officer, he retaliated, and then he was challenged to a duel. So they rowed across the Delaware to Camden, New Jersey, which I think all criminal activity takes place. And he fought and killed his opponent. After that, he was indicted by a Navy board, subsequently found not guilty, because in New Jersey, duels were not illegal. But despite this incident, Levy's application for the commission of lieutenant was granted. And then, as a ship's lieutenant on the ship United States, he got into another fight with the first lieutenant, which is the top lieutenant, was court-martialed and dismissed from the Navy. 2 years later, though, he fought this case and personally got President Monroe to dissuade it and remove the sentence on him. And then he was given his first command, and then in 1825 he joined the ship Cyane as the second lieutenant, where he became very popular with the crew because he saved the life of an American who was imprisoned in the Brazilian Navy. And the Emperor of Brazil, who came to visit the ship, Dom Pedro, was struck so much by Levy's courageousness, he ordered that no U.S. citizen from then on would be bothered, and then offered Levy a job in his Navy. And Levy answered, "Sir, respectfully, I would rather serve as a cabin boy in the United States Navy than hold the rank of Admiral in any service in the world." And because of his refusal to inflict corporal punishment on young seamen, he was again court-martialed and dismissed from the service. Once again, the president, this time President Tyler, overturned the decision. Then there was a board that wanted to lower the ranks of the number of captains in the Navy. 40 captains were dismissed, with Uriah Levy included. On that board was one of the young lieutenants that he had served with originally that was very prejudiced against him and brought up several of the initial charges against him. So again, he fought these and was able to finally, once again, come back in to the Navy. But the question really remains, why would a man enter any career or stay in that career when it's not populated by a huge population of men that look like him or practice the same religion? What would appeal to him, right? Especially when he found outright contempt, harassment, and prejudice. What overriding principles do we think motivated him to stay? The history books don't talk about this, but from my reading of the history and understanding of the Navy, I surmise the following: that his foundation of beliefs in Judaism, where we Jews are told by God to go forward and be a light unto the world, indicates an obligation. And add to that his patriotism, his love of the United States, and the religious freedoms given by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that he would go and serve his nation and be that light. Judaism also talks about sacrifice, responsibility. And for Uriah then, it was really about his natural abilities as a master sailor, that he was obligated to use those in the greater good. The greater good, the higher cause, to serve again his country. To give up those sacrifices, to sacrifice the niceties, comforts of home life, probably a great career, to make a lot of money, and go to war at sea. So also Judaism talks about this thing called righteous indignation. We're obligated to stop bad or evil things from persisting, where we can't turn a blind eye. That when we see it, we have to stop, act, and change it. And that's why I think when he saw the prejudice and the hatred coming forth, that he wanted to stay and eradicate that from the United States Navy. To make the Navy that he loved be closer to the ideals that would be more representative of our great American nation. And he persisted and restored, got his own command, and became a Commodore in the Mediterranean fleet that went on to fight the Barbary pirates. I had to show this because this was a patch a young British officer wore at an aviation conference right after Trump was elected. And I thought, Uriah Levy must be thinking this too. Or not, to try to stop this from happening.
I read it a couple of times.
There's his ship, the Argus, and his ship at sea. So Uriah went on to do a lot of great things. He was the one, because of Jefferson's really being the founder of many great things for our country, but most importantly, this Bill of Religious Freedom. Years later, he went and bought Monticello, the home of Jefferson, and put a lot of money into restoring it, and that's the reason we have it today. He also had many philanthropic goals and causes, and created many Jewish educational institutes in New York. So I think his successful life was summed up in his quote that says, "My parents were Israelites, and I was nurtured in the faith of my ancestors. I am an American. I am a sailor, and I am a Jew." Now, when I decided to join the Navy in 1980, I too was driven by my sense of patriotism. I knew about history. I had minored it in college, and especially American history. And like Levy, I was fascinated by the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, especially the freedom of religion. And of course, knowledge of the Holocaust. And in 1979, when I graduated college, what was going on in the Soviet Union with the Soviet Jews, and not just that, but the particular type of government that the Soviet Union professed, so anti-American and so against the freedoms that we love today. And I knew that when I was commissioned, my oath would serve that same Constitution, the same one that Uriah witnessed being written back when he was 5 years old. Our oath today is, I, Herman Shelanski, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. And if you notice, we do not swear allegiance to any person. It's to a pamphlet, an idea of the Constitution, and with that, the Bill of Rights. Now, when I joined, I didn't know what my Navy experience had in store for me. When I told my mom, whose dreams of having her son follow my dad as a doctor were shattered, she was crying, of course, and asked, do they even have Jews in the Navy? And if they do, certainly won't they be prejudiced against you? So there I was in my second week in Aviation Officer Candidate School, Pensacola, Florida. If you've seen the movie Officer and Gentleman, back in 1984, that sets the stage. We graduated from being this thing called a poopy. It was sort of a hell week. We ran around in green fatigues, doing push-ups all the time, being yelled at. We were dirty. They didn't let us sleep. And finally, after getting through that, we were able to shed this gross uniform, take a shower, and put on khakis. Now you can feel the sense of relief when we're able to do so, because we started out with 38 people in the class, and only 18 were left. Our gunnery sergeant had us all line up, and Gunnery Sergeant Buck Welcher, United States Marine Corps, was introducing us to our new life in our barracks as candidate officers. He said, I have to fill some leadership positions here among the class. First of all, we need a class treasurer. So we demanded all business majors take one step forward. So candidate Dobson stepped forward out of line. Drill instructor got up front and personal and said, Dobson, where'd you go to school? University of Delaware, sir. Well, only weirdos come from Delaware. You won't do. Get back in line. Then he came to candidate Nancy Clark, who had the same answer. Get back in line. Then totally unexpectedly and totally surprised when I heard him say, yeah, get to it. There we go. That's him. That really is him. He said, this won't work. Everyone back in line. Are there any Jews in the class? So, dumbstruck, of course, I used my perfect vision to look left and right, to see, was surprised that it seemed like everyone in my class had taken a step back. And I had unconsciously taken that one step forward. And I thought, here it comes. So Gunny gets up front with me, that big Smokey the Bear hat, poking me in my forehead. And he said, Shelanski, we all know that the Jews own half the world and mortgage the other half. You're going to be our class treasurer. So, of course, I was totally unprepared for this. I was just like Uriah Levy, wanted to serve his country because of the great life that I had as a kid, that my parents enjoyed, the religious freedom. But I didn't know the context of my service would to be defined in any way as a Jew. To be truthful, my first thoughts were, hey, I'm a Jew, therefore I should serve. But now the issue was raised by my drill instructor, and so I was at this decision point. Was I going to shrink from this, hide it, deny it, or quit? Or would I embrace this? Would I be able to show my class exactly what this man was made of? And so it was here who would define who I wanted to be and who I was to become. So I would stick this training out and not only survive it, but excel in it. If I was going to be called out for being a Jew, then my drill instructor would see it was not a weakness, but the very foundation of that which would give me strength. Now it turned out that my drill instructor really wasn't anti-Semitic, but was really poking my resolve and poking for weaknesses. In fact, he would call over the announcing system. He had a microphone that would call out to the whole building. Paul, I highly recommend you get there. You can get all the students in line very quickly. And he would call me over his announcing system. Heeb, get down here now. Of course, being the only, I knew exactly who he was talking to. But I answered, and I wore it with pride on my football jersey for our class. I had Star David on the back. Now, maybe this had some influence on many of the other Jews in the other classes that didn't have this type of experience. But I'll tell you, it's really hard to express my feelings of pride and relief when mysteriously, and again, this goes back to my drill instructor not being really prejudiced, I was pulled out on Friday afternoon to go be issued my white uniform ahead of all the rest of the class. I had no idea why. He had arranged for transportation to take me to Beth El in downtown Pensacola, where I was met by the rest of the Jews in the other classes, and we could enjoy Shabbat. And it was a great moment that still lasts to this day. So after my commissioning, I went to go fly this great mighty airplane, the E-2 Hawkeye. Started out in Miramar, California, the home of Top Gun. Luckily for me, on the first deployment on the USS Enterprise, there was a Jewish chaplain as part of the crew. And our small minion was able to celebrate Shabbat and holidays on a pretty regular basis. We also had a very small, standard military Torah, about this big. It's kind of cute, but I had never seen one that small before. Now, I introduced my Jewishness to my squadron mates by playing Santa Claus in the squadron. And when I had them when they sat on my lap to tell me what they wanted for Christmas, I removed my Santa hat and I had on my kippah underneath. At one point, we even had enough Jews in the squadron. There's 5 in a crew. Actually, one was married to a Jew, so we counted him. That we could get 5 of us together, and we called ourselves the Heap 2 crew. Now, unlike Uriah and probably many of the Jews that have served here today, decades before me, I have to admit I really never did experience the outright prejudice throughout my career. Ignorance, yes. Ignorance of those that had never met a Jew. And there were always those looks, right? Someone looking at you as though it was going over in his mind like, he doesn't look like that devil I was taught he looked like. But I really attribute this lack of prejudice really to the great Navy that I got to serve in. And those that went before me, like Uriah, to change the attitude of the Navy. Again, today people progress because of their own skills and determination, not where they were born, the color of their skin, or whether they wear a kippah. Now, Uriah's diversity contribution to the Navy in our nation as not the only Jew to serve at the time, but the only one that stayed and made it a career. He saw this tradition in naval service, the tradition of flogging, as something antithesis to his Jewish training, where we basically say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He saw this cruel way that they would punish the enlisted sailors, many times maiming them or killing them. He published articles about this, explaining his opposition, and gave lectures on the subject. He refused to use it on his sailors. He felt that by showing respect and honoring his sailors, that they would often perform much better than this cruel method. He was joined in this campaign by the famous author Herman Melville, and in 1950, against the huge bureaucracy of the United States Navy, they ended corporal punishment for sailors. We were the first Navy in the world, proudly, to end this. And this helped change the attitude of our sailors to become better sailors, treated more kindly so that they could do the work that was needed of them. And from that, from 1812, after that war, and onward after the Civil War, we became the most powerful Navy in the world. And I trace that back to one of these moments where our sailors were so important to them. So, like Uriah, my Jewish upbringing and morals determined what style of leadership I would do. I've always based my decisions on those that I was raised with. Now, and I've always striven to grow as a leader. And I think my morals as a Jew made me a better leader. And knowing that I represented to my fellow sailors what it meant to be a naval leader, it made me want to continue to grow as a leader and be a leader in my Jewish community. And to my Jewish community, knowing that I represented them as a Jewish sailor in the United States Navy, wanted me to become a better Jew. It was a sign that I call, it was sort of an upward spiral of conscious, moral, and ethical growth. For me, it always meant starting with people. It meant rewarding them for what they did in service of our country. Amongst all the chaos and the long separation from families and 9-month deployments underway in fairly crowded, harsh conditions, this meant the world to sailors. And we would celebrate on a daily basis at one sailor every day to tell the rest of the ship what a great job they did. Because of this reputation as a leader, the CNO assigned me to a special assignment for the Secretary of Defense, who at the time was Secretary Gates. I was part of a team to study the effects on the military should the law of don't ask, don't tell be repealed. I led the survey and engagement team. We wrote the survey that went out to all of the armed forces, traveled all around the world talking to sailors, Marines, soldiers, airmen, Coast Guard, National Guard, and everyone that wore a uniform. This law had made it impossible for sailors to admit who they were, and were always living in fear of being discharged from the Navy. They were living a lie. And there were many wonderful sailors that left the United States Navy. That study, I believe, had a small part into finally repeal that law, so now that anyone can serve openly. And for me, it also meant, for my faith, to use and celebrate my Judaism in many simple ways in all my travels of the world, in all the 50 countries, and all the seas and the oceans that I traveled in. I held Shabbat services even when there were only 2 Jews on the ship, me being one of them. We always would seek out our Jewish heritage around the world, visiting ancient synagogues. We saw the oldest one in the Americas in Curacao. We explored a 2,000-year-old mikveh, which was found uncovered underneath a hotel in Syracuse, Italy. I met with Jews in the Philippines. I prayed with those that had an Irish brogue in Ireland. I attended an official military ceremony at Yad Vashem to lay a wreath as a military member of the United States Navy in memory of the Holocaust. I got to sit Shiva for a Jewish family that lived in Bahrain that needed a minyan. Prayed at sea during 9 months in our small chapel that was situated underneath the flight deck, where you could hear every crash of the landing and every takeoff. And then at sea, with over 60-foot waves breaking over the bow of the ship during hurricanes, continued that tradition. Once we even hosted, when I was a squadron commander, a Passover Seder. There were only a dozen Jews that we knew of on the ship, but we put the word out that we were going to have a Seder. We were going to do it down in the officers' wardrobe, which held about 120 people. Before we knew it, over 160 people had signed up for the Seder. I didn't know there were that many Jews on board. But they weren't, of course. They were very fascinated to come. So we held the Seder at the head table, sat myself, we had a rabbi come, and we had the admiral and the ship's captain. And as we started the service, we were allowed, because on a ship there's no alcohol at sea, they have very tiny little thimble glasses, you may have seen them. And they had them passed out to all the participants in the Seder and poured a little bit of wine in them. And this was going very well. We started the service and went through until the admiral, who was very fastidious and was reading ahead, and he said, "Hold it, Rabbi. The book, the Haggadah here, this book of yours, says full, F-U-L-L, full glasses of wine, and we're supposed to have 4 of them." And, you know, in the Navy, we follow regulations. So get rid of these little things, pour out the water out of your water glass, and fill up the glass. We had the most dedicated, happy crew ever. And then recently, we were able to sponsor at the White House, on the lawn of the White House, with Jewish midshipmen, the lighting of a national memorial. So I want to finish with one last story from my command on the Carrier Truman that talks of history and faith and Judaism. As you all know from history, President Truman, who despite contrary advice from his cabinet and closest advisors, was the first head of state to recognize the state of Israel. Because of this, he received a Torah as a gift from Hyman Weitzman, who was the ambassador for the new state at the time. It was a historical moment, recorded in history. That Torah, which is from Lithuania, is a family Torah, now resides in the the Truman Independence Museum in Independence, Missouri. So I was in command of the Truman during the 60th anniversary of the birth of Israel. And we were off the coast of Israel at the time, and we flew out dignitaries and members of the Knesset from Israel to give talks to the crew and to talk to them about the Holocaust. And many of the professors from the university from Tel Aviv were survivors. And then, because of that experience, I knew that I had in the past had a Torah that we got for the USS Ronald Reagan when we commissioned it. And it was time now to commission a Torah, but we did it on a special event in honor of the 60th anniversary of the State of Israel. So we were able to get a Holocaust Torah, also from Lithuania, that had been sent to a warehouse in Prague. It had been captured by the Nazis. And its use, the Nazis were going to use it as an exhibit in a museum that was going to be called The Extinct Race of the Jews. Now luckily for us, this storehouse was saved from the destruction of the war, and at the end of the Soviet Union, these artifacts and Torahs were saved and some restored. There's a gentleman, many of you may know him, Mr. Mark Talisman, who's from Maryland. He was a key player in getting much of this sent back to England and restored and then sent to the United States and actually dispersed to many Jewish communities around the world. It was called A Precious Legacy, and there's a book about it. This Torah then was purchased by the Tidewater, which is down in Norfolk, Virginia, Jewish Foundation. With the generosity of many of the members, they paid for the restoration, they paid for the Torah, and loaned it to the ship for the remainder, the 40 years of the remainder of the life of the ship. Now for the ceremony, we had the Truman Torah escorted, military escort on a military airplane, fly that Torah back to my ship, kept under 24-hour guard on our hangar bay. And then next to it was joined our new Torah, which was, again, also from Lithuania. And here you see the hangar bay where we had over 600 members from the Jewish communities all over the Virginia area come and help celebrate. This, of course, helped strengthen the bonds between the Navy and our community and led to the understanding for our citizens what role our armed forces, our military played in history, especially in World War II, in, of course, ending the Holocaust. And our sailors learned about the Holocaust. And our sailors learned what the word Torah meant. And many of them, most of them, had never even seen one before. And so today, once again, the USS Harris Truman is getting ready to sail in harm's way wherever our nation needs them, with dedicated and patriotic men and women of our nation. And on board, ready to sail with them, is a Torah that was supposed to be displayed in a Nazi museum, The Extinct Race of the Jews, an exhibit that would represent the rise of destruction, death, and hatred as a new world order. But now, in an ironic twist of fate, that Torah is sailing on the most powerful ship in the world, with the most powerful navy in the world, for freedom, friendship, and peace around the world. And some of that crew also bear the full mantle of American, sailor, and Jew. Thank you.
I have to say, we have a new tradition.
Just want to stuff.
I'll take it.
I want to say a little
All right. Yes, sir. Yes. The question is about Admiral Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy. So, for those who don't know, Admiral Rickover was an immigrant from Poland. He was Jewish, and he didn't have a lot of money growing up, but he was an incredibly bright young man. And with the help of his senator, so he lived in a very Jewish district, got a commission to the United States Naval Academy. Of course, there he thought and found a lot of prejudice against Jews in the Navy. This was back in the 30s. What was that?
I think it was class of 23 from the Naval Academy.
Class of 23. Yeah, 1923. So he went on to become he went out to sea. He did the typical things that sailors did. He served on ships. He actually had command of a ship for a very short time. He did not do well in that area. But he was incredibly bright and decided to join the engineering portion of the United States Navy. Because of that, he was assigned to the original group that was working on the nuclear bomb prior to the end of World War II. He learned about nuclear power. And like Enrico Fermi and Einstein knew that there was a peaceful use to this amazing energy. And he was the premier driver to engineer the first nuclear power plant propulsion for the United States Navy. And he did it against all odds. The guy went against, the Navy didn't want this. And he was a brilliant man and used politics and things in a way that it's amazing that he even succeeded. Now, Jewish birth, Jewish identity, married a not a Jewish girl, and at some point in his career decided that he didn't want to be determined as a Jew anymore. Though I will say that later in life, towards the end of his life, and his second wife, he talked differently all about that. And much of it at that time, and there's many Jews, we don't have time to go into the history of all naval admirals that are Jewish. There are several that also went through their Navy career either pretending or not even acknowledging. One of our most famous military Jews was Admiral Borda, as Chief of Naval Operations. No one really knew he was Jewish. A few people did. Unfortunately, he committed suicide. And of course, on his Navy record, so when you join the military, you have to say what religion you are. And there it was that he had wrote when he joined that he was Jewish. He married, raised his children Protestant, never identified. But deep in his heart, many believe, and those that knew him personally, believe that he still remained a Jew to the end of his career. I'm not quite sure that was what you were getting at, but okay.
The first ship that was naval propulsion?
The Nautilus. Yeah, the submarine.
Next question, quick follow-up. There was nuclear power for civilian use, the SS Savannah, that had been decommissioned as that city dried out or something.
Right. Right.
Why did that not take? Why did not transition to commercial?
It was too expensive for the commercial line. But I'll tell you one more story about why Rickover was such an amazing guy. And this goes to who we are as Americans. So he knew that there was issues with radiation, but no one understood the full effects of what radiation can do. Rickover, even against the advice of his own engineers, decided that he would increase the level of protection, huge boundaries of lead between the nuclear power plant, strict rules about when and where and how much radiation a sailor could go. He asked the experts at the time, how much radiation will cause sickness, how much will cause this? And he says, I want 100 times the protection. So what happened? That was a tactical and strategic thing, because our submarine sailors then could go and stay underwater for months, and then they could go to shore duty, they could come back and go to sea immediately. On the Soviet Navy, which also then finally produced nuclear submarines, the radiation was so bad that they could only be underwater for about 3 months. They had to take years off to grow their bone marrow back because of the radiation that had deteriorated them. And because of that, the submariners in the Russian Navy never grew the tactical competence that our sailors did. And you know, when you see the great movies out there, it's true. Our sailors and our ability, we knew where they were all the time, and we knew what they were doing, and they had no clue where we were. And that was a testament really to Admiral Rickover and his ability. Yes, sir.
Admiral, you commanded the Harry Truman. There's been some literature recently that they're thinking of retiring it. They don't want to spend the money to refuel it.
Yeah, it's a bad idea. Oh yeah, so the question is about the Harry S. Truman, and there's been some talk about not refueling it. So it's coming up in 3 years to its 25-year life cycle. The Navy decided not to put it in the budget. And they were talking about saving that $4 billion to do some other type of advanced type of technology. So the carrier, we already paid for the carrier the last 50 years. You have to just put new fuel in it. So, you know, to me, the best ship in the Navy, you don't decommission that because it's a great ship. And not because of me, but because the traditions of those great crew members, they continue to do great things with that ship. It's not a great idea. I don't think it's going to happen.
You think they'll refuel it?
I think they will.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, what could the Navy or the U.S. government do about what is happening with China in terms of its, you know, in the ocean there, in the islands that they're building? You know, we could. What can we really pragmatically do?
So the question is about China. What's the Navy? What can we do about that? So recently, we've upped our presence in the East China Sea. We have 4 deployed into Japan, all of our latest and greatest technology. We've recently done a lot of transits along Taiwan, which for many years we never did, because we thought it would make the Chinese mad. Now we're making the Chinese mad. You know, we sail closer, we do freedom of navigation, and we're getting more aggressive in our response to the Chinese. So I think like everyone, we hope this doesn't come to any type of real conflict with the Chinese, but we're showing them that we're there to stay, and we're not going to fall over and let them take over the full China Sea. In fact, when I was active duty, I told the State Department, when I was working with Deputy Secretary of Defense Carter, who later became the Secretary of Defense, I said, why do we call it the China Sea? Let's name it something different. That'll show them. Yes, sir, in the back.
In the 1920s, Billy Mitchell showed that air power could sink battleships. Do you think the aircraft carriers are in danger from satellites which are armed?
Well, so the question is about the general question, I'll kind of rename it, is there's been a lot of literature lately about the vulnerability of aircraft carriers. In many respects to not just air power, but to missiles. The DF-21, you know, from the Chinese, they particularly built this missile, and they call it the carrier killer. Frankly, as an aircraft carrier guy, I'm proud of the fact that someone is so scared of me, they've named the weapon just to come and get me. Okay? They have a long way to go before they can find me. It's a big ocean, and I can move really fast. I can go over 600 miles in a day, right? So they have to keep track of me, they have to locate me, they have to identify me, they have to track me. That missile's got to go all the way out, and then at the end game, where I've got defenses on my ship, they've got to defeat those defenses to come at me. They don't have a good chance. Yes, sir.
What is the next phase of your life where you go from here?
The next phase of my life, I've already started. I retired 1 August. Being a lover of aircraft carriers, Newport News Shipbuilding down in Virginia, the president called me and they said, you know, we don't have any people with your experience on our staff. Would you like to come work with us? We build nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and nuclear-powered submarines. She always tells me, don't forget those things. So I'm working with them at Newport News. I wasn't ready to retire. Yes, sir, right here.
You covered some of the elements. Admiral James Savarides, his book Sea Power, his viewpoint of what's going on in the world now. You basically agree with him, or you have some different points of view on that?
No, I think Stavridis gets it right. The man is brilliant. I read everything and I agree wholeheartedly with everything he says. He's one of my heroes. So the question was, some of the writings from retired Admiral Stavridis talk about use of naval force, actually not just naval force, but all sorts, the wide spectrum of diplomacy, United States power, and how we should use that in the world. Admiral Stavridis was, before he retired, he was the chief of all of NATO in Europe. Brilliant man, a great writer, and a great thinker. And I've often heard him speak and know him personally. He's a brilliant guy. Is there someone over here? Anybody else? Oh, yes, sir. Again.
Anyway, do you have any thoughts or comments about General Mattis's resignation as Secretary of Defense?
General Mattis's resignation as Secretary of Defense. I think it's a great loss for our nation. I think Mattis is an icon of, of what I believe a leader should be. He is intelligent. He is probably the most well-read senior officer I've ever met. He's articulate. He inspires people all the time. He led people in actual combat. And when you talk to those troops that fought with him, they have nothing but amazing things to say about him. So his talents as a very quiet warrior, I think it's a shame we lost that, because he was doing great things for our military. My personal opinion, anyways. Great man.
Thank you. It's been a long evening for many of us. Another round of applause for the Landis family. And Dr. Middleman. And Josh Landis gets the final word.
Not the final word, just 15 seconds. I want to A, thank the Admiral, and B, I want to commend all of you. The quality of your questions was excellent. So it's very impressive.
Thank you all. I hope I'll see many of you at the next event at Gratz. We have them as often as we can. Thank you.